come a time when you look at the child you once held in your arms and realize the distance between you is growing. You gave your whole life to raising, loving, and protecting them. And yet now, your words are brushed aside, your opinions dismissed. Sometimes, they even make you feel like your presence is something to be tolerated rather than cherished. That feeling isn't just sadness, it stings. It makes you question yourself. Did I go wrong somewhere? Am I asking for too much when all I want is a little respect? You might feel the urge to speak up, to remind them of the sleepless nights you spent by their bedside, the meals where you gave up the best part for them, the dreams you put on hold for their future. But sadly, expressing those grievances now may only widen the rift between you. So instead of arguing, you need a different approach, calmer, wiser. Today, I'll share with you 6 practical but powerful ways to regain the respect of your grown children. Not with shouting, but with presence. Not to win an argument, but to reclaim the place you deserve in their hearts. Some of what I say might surprise you, but if you stay until the end, you'll see. Sometimes all it takes is changing the way you rise, for others to finally take notice. Let's begin. Action 1. Stop chasing their approval. One of the biggest mistakes many parents make as they grow older is believing that the more they give in, the more they sacrifice, and the more they try to please their children, the more love and appreciation they will receive in return. But in reality, the opposite often happens. When you give too much without keeping anything for yourself, you're not appreciated, you're simply taken for granted. Many parents don't realize this until it's too late. They stay silent, they keep the peace in the family, hoping their quiet sacrifices will be noticed. But when selflessness becomes a habit, it stops being an act of love. It becomes a way of erasing oneself. The story of Ruth, a 75-year-old woman living in the suburbs of Chicago, is a powerful example. She used to be a strong, independent woman who ran her own bakery for nearly 30 years. After retiring, she moved closer to her son to help take care of her grandchildren. At first, she was happy to lend a hand. But over time, helping a little turned into taking care of everything. She was picking up the kids every day, cooking, cleaning, and barely had any time for herself. Every time her son asked for something, she said yes, not because she wanted to, but because she was afraid that saying no might hurt his feelings. She got used to living without rest, without being asked how she was doing, and without a single thank you. All because she thought, I'm the mother. I need to be there when my child needs me. But one day, Ruth found herself exhausted. She felt like a housemaid in her own family. No one asked what she wanted, what she needed, or whether she was tired. And the worst part? She realized that her son had started to see her sacrifices as normal, something expected, not appreciated. The respect she once had seemed to disappear, and she didn't even know when it had started to slip away. That was the moment she decided to make a change. She began saying no when she felt overwhelmed. She clearly communicated that she needed rest too, that she deserved respect. Not to create distance, but to remind her family that she is a person, not just a mother who's always available. At first, things were a little tense. Her son wasn't used to being told no, but over time, things began to shift. He started checking in on her, saying thank you, and showing more consideration for her feelings. Their relationship became a two-way street, built on real understanding and respect. Respect doesn't come from how much you give. It comes from how well you value yourself. If you don't set boundaries, others will never know where the line is. And if you don't appreciate yourself, your children won't learn how to appreciate you either. Growing older is not about becoming a shadow in your children's lives. It's the time to stand firm in your own worth. When you live with self-respect, people around you will be forced to see you differently, not because you demand it, but because you truly deserve it. Action 2. Don't argue, lead by example. When you've spent your whole life raising your children, pouring your heart, your time, even giving up your own dreams just to make sure they have everything they need, there's perhaps no deeper pain than feeling dismissed or disrespected by the very children you once cradled, fed, and watched over with every beat of your heart. This kind of pain doesn't shout. It doesn't make a scene. It quietly eats away at you. It's the feeling of having no voice in your own family. You share an opinion and they brush it off. You express concern and they wave it away. You disagree with something and they call you old-fashioned or out of touch. And it leaves you wondering, who am I in my children's eyes now? Many parents, when faced with this situation, react by trying to reason, to argue, to remind their children of the sleepless nights and the sacrifices they made. But here's the hard truth. The more you try to prove you deserve respect, the more you put yourself in a position of weakness. Because respect doesn't come from debate. It comes from presence, from the way you carry yourself, from the calm confidence in how you respond. Let me tell you the story of Edward, a retired engineer living in Ohio. He was a principled man who raised his children with love and discipline. But after he retired, things began to change. His children, now grown, had their own lives and seemed to forget the father who was once their rock. When he voiced concerns about their overspending, they dismissed it. When he worried about the health of a grandchild, they smiled politely and told him not to interfere. He began to feel like a shadow in the very home he had built. At first, Edward got angry. He talked more, explained more, trying to reclaim his place in the family. But the more he spoke, the more distant they became. His words triggered defensiveness, or worse, indifference. Then one night, after a particularly hurtful comment from one of his older children, he didn't argue. He quietly walked away, went into his room, and began writing in his journal. From that day forward, he chose to do things differently. He stopped offering advice unless it was asked for. He let go of trying to teach. Instead, he focused on himself, maintaining a healthy lifestyle, joining a book club, learning to play an instrument. He lived with the quiet confidence of someone who knew his own worth. And something strange happened. Before long, his children began to seek out his advice. They started sitting with him, listening to his stories, because when he stopped trying to be respected, his calm, steady presence earned him more respect than ever before. Respect is not something you demand, it's something you build. By living in alignment with who you are, by standing firm in your values, and refusing to let others define your identity. When you act like someone who knows their own place in the world, the people around you, including your children, will have no choice but to see it too. So if you're at a point where you feel unseen or overlooked by your children, don't use your words to plead for recognition. Use your presence to claim it. Live in a way that makes you proud of who you are, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop trying to prove anything at all. Action 3. Withdraw your emotional dependence. As we enter the later stages of life, one of the most painful and difficult lessons to accept is realizing that our children are no longer the emotional comfort we once hoped they would be. You may love them unconditionally, may have sacrificed everything to raise and nurture them, but there comes a time when that love is no longer returned in the way you expected. Many parents fall into a quiet trap. They hope that their children will be their source of emotional support, the ones who give them a sense of meaning, of still being needed. But the harsh truth is, the more you cling to that hope, the more you begin to lose yourself. No matter how grown up they are, children can feel pressured when they sense that their parents' happiness depends too heavily on their attention. Every phone call you make becomes an unspoken message. Mom needs you. Dad misses you. And over time, what was once a bond turns into a burden. Nancy, a 78-year-old widow living in Sacramento, found herself in exactly that situation. She was a devoted mother, a gentle woman who had centered her entire life around her children. When they grew up, got married, and moved to other cities, she began to feel invisible. Every morning, she waited for the phone to ring. At every meal, she hoped someone would join her. When no one called, she would call them, sometimes several times a week. At first, her children answered, but eventually, they started avoiding the calls, offering excuses about how busy they were. Nancy began to feel as if she was begging for affection from the very children she once carried in her arms. One day, after a rushed and distracted phone call, she sat in silence for a long time. And in that silence, she realized something profound. She had been trying to find her self-worth through the eyes of others, even her own children. That day, she made a decision to change. Nancy enrolled in an art class at the local community center. She joined a book club, started walking each evening with a group of older women in her neighborhood. She tended her garden with care, baked cookies, and sometimes shared them with neighbors. She stopped calling her children so often. When she missed them, she wrote in her journal instead of picking up the phone. Then something unexpected happened. Within a few weeks, her children started reaching out. One called to check in, concerned because she hadn't been calling like before. Another was surprised to hear she was preparing for a small art exhibition with her class. The whole family began to see a different version of their mother, not the woman sitting by the phone waiting, but someone who had found a life of her own. That sense of independence changed everything. They began to respect her more, not as just a lonely old mom, but as a woman of strength, freedom, and self-respect. She became a source of quiet inspiration for her children and grandchildren. The lesson here isn't about pulling away or ignoring your children. It's about learning to love without clinging, to connect without losing your own emotional balance. When you stop chasing emotional fulfillment from others and begin building your own life, something magical happens. People are drawn back to you, not out of obligation, but out of genuine respect. Action 4. Set boundaries and enforce them. There's something few people say out loud, but every parent feels it deep down. Your children will treat you the way you allow them to. Not because they are unkind, but because every relationship, even within a family, operates based on the boundaries you either set or fail to set. When you stay silent while others hurt you, they begin to believe it's okay to keep doing it. One of the deeper reasons respect fades within families is quiet resignation. Many parents, as they grow older and physically weaker, become more hesitant. They fear being a burden, fear causing conflict, so they slowly let their children speak over them, make decisions for them, and ignore their feelings and time as if those things no longer matter. Robert was a classic example. He was a former businessman who once ran a company with over 100 employees. Throughout his career, he was known as firm, composed, and highly capable. But after retiring, he stepped into the role of full-time father and grandfather, and something strange happened. The very children he once raised began treating him as though he no longer had anything worth saying. They interrupted him when he spoke. They dismissed his opinions on finances, family matters, even health, subjects he had spent a lifetime understanding. Instead of consulting him, they made decisions for him. Robert used to tell himself, "It's okay, I'm old now, as long as the family is at peace." But every time he stayed quiet, he felt something inside him crack. His confidence, once so solid, began to erode under the weight of being ignored. Then one day, as he sat in the living room and watched his eldest daughter brush off his words, he suddenly realized, if he didn't speak up now, when would he ever reclaim his place? He didn't shout. He didn't slam the table. He simply began to change how he responded. When someone cut him off, he stopped talking. Not in anger, but with quiet resolve, waiting until he had space to be heard. When his ideas were dismissed, he didn't argue, but he also didn't back down. He calmly held his ground, reminding them that he had earned the right to be respected, whether they agreed with him or not. At first, his children were thrown off. Some were annoyed. There were even moments of distance. But over time, something surprising happened. They began to come back. They started asking for his advice, not out of obligation, but because they began to see him clearly again. A father, a grandfather, still standing strong, not faded by age, but made even more dignified by the way he carried himself. His children respected him more, because he had chosen to respect himself. If you find yourself in a similar place, if you feel like a shadow in your own home, ask yourself, how long have I allowed this to happen? And if the answer hurts, remember this, it's never too late to change. Respect doesn't come from pleading, it comes from standing tall, from setting boundaries, from saying that's enough, not with anger, but with quiet strength and dignity. When you start acting like someone who deserves respect, others will have no choice but to reconsider the way they treat you. Action 5. Stop giving without appreciation. One of the quickest paths to emotional pain isn't being rejected. It's giving and giving, only to realize no one ever truly appreciated it. As parents, many of us fall into this familiar trap. We give our children our time, our support, our money, even our health and the precious years of our later life, with the hope that our love and sacrifices will be seen, valued, and returned. But then, we come to a painful realization. Not only are we not thanked, we're often taken for granted. What we give is no longer appreciated, it becomes expected. The story of Arthur, a 78-year-old retired father, is a clear example. He spent his life working hard, raising 3 children who all became successful. After his wife passed, he moved closer to his eldest son, hoping to be more involved with his children and grandchildren. Arthur was always the one who offered help. He babysat when his son was busy, drove the grandkids to school, and even used his retirement savings to help his youngest daughter pay off her student loans. At first, he believed he was doing the right thing, but over time, something heartbreaking became clear. No one asked if he was tired. There were no words of thanks. When he once mentioned wanting a few days to rest, his children complained about not having help. His kindness had become invisible. Worse, when he injured his back and needed someone to take him to the doctor, not one of his children could make time for him. One evening, after taking a taxi to the hospital alone, Arthur sat quietly in the waiting room, feeling empty. He realized something important. He had taught his children that he was always available, that he never needed anything. And by doing so, he had led them to believe that he didn't need to be cared for, not as a person with feelings, but as someone always in the background. Arthur didn't get angry, but he made a change. From that day forward, he began pulling back from the roles he had overplayed. He started saying no to unreasonable requests. He picked up fishing again on weekends, a hobby he had long forgotten because of family obligations. He stopped being the family's fixer, and instead, he began reclaiming the center of his own life. At first, his children didn't understand. They were uncomfortable, even a little upset. But slowly, things began to shift. They started calling to check in. They began making time for him. Not because they needed something, but because they wanted to be near him. Because when kindness has boundaries, it finally becomes valued. If you're starting to feel like your giving isn't appreciated, take a moment and ask yourself, am I giving too much without setting any limits? Kindness should never be a reason for others to take advantage of you. Setting boundaries is not selfish. It's how you teach others that your love, your time, your presence is a gift, not an obligation. And when you begin to love yourself enough to set those boundaries, others will begin to learn how to love you properly too. Action 6. Build a life outside of them. There's something many parents don't realize until it's too late. Children cannot truly respect someone who lives only for them. When you were younger, you gave everything to your kids. Your love, your sacrifices, your youth, and your strongest years. You made them the center of your world, believing that by doing so, you would keep them close. But as time goes on, they grow up, build lives of their own, get busier, and the emptiness inside you begins to grow. You start calling more often. You wait for them to check in. You offer advice, sometimes when it's not asked for. And you think that's love. But in the eyes of your children, it can quietly become a burden. That's exactly what happened to Linda, a 78-year-old widow living in Oregon. After her husband passed away, she poured all the love she had left into her 2 adult sons. They didn't live far, yet she felt forgotten. Linda called every day, asked about every detail, sent long, heartfelt messages. At first, her sons responded politely, but soon messages were left on read. Calls became brief and routine. Even holiday visits started to feel more like obligations than moments of joy. Linda wondered, did I do something wrong? But one day, sitting in the quiet of her empty home, she realized it wasn't wrong to love, but she had forgotten to love herself. That was the turning point. Instead of waiting for the phone to ring, she signed up for a morning painting class. She joined a walking group with other seniors, learned to cook Thai food, and began writing a blog about grief, not to complain, but to heal. She stopped talking about her children in every conversation. She started living for herself. And then something unexpected happened. The calls from her sons became more frequent. This time, they genuinely wanted to know what their mom was up to. They were surprised to hear she was planning a weekend trip or had a full schedule of her own. Slowly, they began to see her differently, not as a lonely mother who needed to be managed, but as a vibrant, independent woman. Respect returned, not because she demanded it, but because she dared to fully live her own life. The truth is, people, no matter who they are, respect those who have a clear purpose, their own joy, and a sense of self. If your children feel that your self-worth depends entirely on their attention, they will feel pressured. But if you live your life with passion, strength, and dignity, they will admire you. If you feel like your children no longer respect you, ask yourself, are you truly living or just existing from one phone call or message to the next? Get up, do something for yourself. Return to who you are, not just a mother or father, but a whole person with dreams, hobbies, and self-worth. Because the moment you stop waiting is the moment you begin to be truly valued. If this message touches something in your heart, share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, click that follow button, because we're here to bring you more stories and insights to help you live with confidence, purpose, and the respect you truly deserve. Thank you for staying until the end.